Welcome to the first of our 4 confessional documents from the last century, the Theological Declaration of Barmen. Barmen is a confession written at a time when the German church was inundated and entranced by the Nazism of the 1930s, and it serves as a warning to the church whenever they become too cozy with the ideologies, specifically of nationalism and fascism, but really any time that the powerful attempt to co-opt the church for their own purposes. Thus, this becomes a rather fascinating corrective to what we've seen in some of our earlier confessional statements, where, among other things, they were often used to bolster the role of secular rulers. This is, among other things, a declaration of resistance to evil. One note for this week. You'll notice that I'm blurring out part of the banner for this particular confession, as the platform is understandably quite strict about the use of particular symbols, even when they're crossed out. Representatives from the Lutheran, Reformed, and United Churches were called together by the Pastors' Emergency League, more on them in a minute, to a synod meeting in the city of Barmen to act against the rise of the so-called German Christians, the majority of those churches that were aligning themselves with the Third Reich. In preparation for the synod, the pastors and theologians Hans Asmussen, Thomas Britt, and Karl Barth were appointed to create a theological document. Barth, the very well-known Swiss theologian, many of his books are on my shelf, is thought to be the primary author. The 3 appointees met between May 15th and 16th, 1934 to comprise the draft document. The National Synod convened a couple weeks later on the evening of May 29th. The document was given a first read the following morning and was edited and revised by a commission of 8. And then the following day, May 31st, 1934, it was unanimously adopted by the Synod. Upon its adoption, they sang out together, "Now thank we all our God." The major themes of the declaration are idolatry and the lordship of Jesus Christ over the church, not the state, or any political leader. Through these assertions, the document highlights those critical insistences of the Reformation: solus Christus, sola scriptura, sola gratia, and sola fide. Christ alone, Scripture alone, grace alone, and faith alone. This document was written in protest of a time when the now in power Nazi Party was poisoning the German church with their anti-Semitic, anti-Marxist, white supremacist ideologies. They went so far as to pass laws about who could actually serve and work in churches. And this document likewise protests the sheer number of Christians in Germany who seemed to be completely on board with what was going to happen. Margit Ernst Habib writes, quote, "Barmen describes Jesus Christ as the Lord, the one we have to obey, the one who has a claim upon our life. But this very same Jesus is the one who is our righteousness and sanctification and redemption," in 1 Corinthians 1:30. "This Lord is the one who became a slave for our sake, and that can mean only one thing for us. Not one single person can claim our ultimate loyalty. Not one single person can claim any form of lordship over us and turn us into slaves. Christ's lordship means freedom for us, for there are no other lords in any areas of our life. This is a revolutionary claim. With its understanding of the lordship of grace, Barmen has given us the freedom to criticize every destructive lordship, revealing it as an idol." End quote. The document is written primarily in a call and response style, highlighting what it is that they believe, followed by a rejection of what they do not. Why was it written? In a word, Nazis. This document is a protest against those in the church who saw what was coming to their nation as well as what was already happening. This particularly heinous brand of ethnic nationalism whose tentacles were stretching out into every part of 1930s Germany. With Hitler's rise to power, the new Reich government was implementing their Aryan laws which, among other things, banned anyone with Jewish ancestry from working in the church. Essentially, with these new laws, neither Paul, nor Peter, nor Jesus himself was legally allowed to be employed in any churches in Germany. And a lot of Christians at the time, for reasons we don't really have time to get into, were entirely on board with this, as I mentioned. The rise of this brand of fascism was due to a wide confluence of events, which included the economic hardships endured by the Weimar period, along with its humiliation after World War I, a conservative backlash against some of the more progressive policies of the Republic, and of course, this rampant anti-Semitism, which had been with Germany for a very long time at that point. That's something that we see in Luther and well before that in the medieval Catholic Church. That hatred is something that Germany and most of Europe had wrestled with for a very long time. There was also the rising popularity of so-called positive Christianity, which mixed Nazi ideology with Christianity, trying to remove everything Jewish from Christianity, which of course you can't really do. Among other things, they thought the Old Testament needed to go away. Anyway, that deserves its own topic and video. But it was terrible, and it becomes a way for the state to, again, utilize and co-opt the church to help its own rise in power. And we know where that led. However, not every Christian in Germany was on board with the whole having their faith co-opted by the Nazis. The movement that will become the Confessing Church, which included such influential figures as the later martyred Dietrich Bonhoeffer, stood up to the Reich as much as they felt that they could, especially in the earlier years as Nazis were just coming into power before they were forced underground. The movement began with the theologian Martin Niemöller leading the Pastors' Emergency League. That was an organization set up to help clergy of Jewish descent in the wake of the Aryan laws, and then it sort of moved on from there, right? That movement was the one that called the synod that Barmen ends up being written and adopted into. And the minority of Christians in Germany who sided with this opposition to the Nazi Party becomes known as the Confessing Church, which, as you probably can guess or know, quickly becomes persecuted by the state, with many of its leaders, including Bonhoeffer. Granted, he participated in a conspiracy to assassinate Hitler, but many of the leaders of the Confessing Church end up in concentration camps. I've referred to this document throughout as one of resistance, and it is. But it's important for us to remember that nowhere in this document is there a protest against any of the totalitarian measures of the Nazi Party, nor a protest specifically against the widespread persecution of Jews that was already happening in 1934. The Holocaust was yet to come, but the signs of it were sort of everywhere at that point. This document merely protests by declaring its ecclesiastical independence from the state. And while it is a very important precedent for our final document, another document of protest, the Belhar Confession, we might say now that there's a lot to be desired looking back through history at it, whether or not that's a fair charge or not. However, the survivors of the Confessing Church recognized this, and at the end of the war, they sought to confess what they considered to be their inadequate opposition to the Third Reich in their 1945 Stuttgart Declaration of Guilt. Friends, thank you once again for joining me as we've journeyed through our confessions. We're now within the last century, and we get some pretty interesting ones. Next time, we're going to look at the first document that was specifically written by and for U.S. Presbyterians, the Confession of 1967. In the meantime, take care.